So the idea of creating or allowing users to create their own tokens, their own assets, their own cryptocurrencies is something that Ethereum really jumped on, that became a killer use case for Ethereum and spurred a lot of use of that system. And the same idea has been around in the context of Zcash since before Zcash launched, but to date, there's been other higher priorities like improving efficiency, making it easier to use shielded transactions and whatnot. More recently, there's been some more discussion about the idea of what we call user-defined assets or ZK assets or tokens, and I'm sure that we'll some more different names will be used during the course of this panel. So this panel session is drawing together some people who have a background in this space, who have relevant experience, who have relevant knowledge about the advantages, the disadvantages, the pitfalls, the potential for adding this type of technology to Zcash. We'll go around and let everybody introduce themselves. I, of course, am Jack Gavigan, Executive Director of the Zcash Foundation. And Ian?
Yep, so I'm Ian Myers. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland outside Washington, D.C., and Zcash actually came out of work that ultimately was my PhD thesis. So I've been here since well before the beginning, and am also on the board of directors for the Zcash Foundation.
I'm Peter Van Valkenburg. I am by far the least technical person on this panel. I have a law and economics background. I've been on the board of the Zcash Foundation since its inception, along with Matt and Andrew. And my day job is at Coin Center, which is a nonprofit policy organization based here in Washington, D.C., oddly as well, not far from Ian. And we specialize in educating people in government about cryptocurrency technology and how it can be a benefit to humanity. Yep.
My name is J.R. Willett. I'm probably best known for having done the first ICO. It was called Mastercoin. It was basically to put user assets on top of Bitcoin. And it did a bunch of other stuff too. And so someone had the idea, well, we're thinking about doing this on Zcash. Maybe we should invite this guy and have him talk on our panel. So here I am.
And hey guys, I'm Matt Luongo. I run a venture production studio called Thesis. We do a lot of Bitcoin, and now we're hoping to do some Zcash adjacent work, Fold, Keep, TBTC, and then finally Saddle.
Cool. We're going to kick it off with a kind of a round robin of some questions, but for everybody who's listening live, please go to the Discord, please go to the channel, the UDAs panel channel, and post any questions or comments that you have in there, and we'll be surfacing those towards the end of this session. So Peter, let's start off with you. You've been, and by the way, I feel like everybody should tell us what their favorite terminology is for what we're talking about. I personally use UDAs, and Peter, you've been a strong advocate of them, of adding UDAs to Zcash. Why do you think the combination of this feature and Zcash style privacy is so powerful?
Yeah, so aside from just being interested in sort of flexible cryptocurrency blockchains like, say, Ethereum since Ethereum's inception, and having to explain these things to policymakers in DC, like what is an ERC20 token standard and such and such and such back 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, maybe not 4 years ago. But aside from just general interest, I really started thinking about this with respect to Zcash and the Zcash Foundation when I was just chatting with Ian about how can we improve this protocol so that people will actually want to use it. Zcash as a protocol is great for privacy. It is probably the most robust attempt at creating a private digital cash. But the fact of the matter is, sadly, that people, and this is just revealed preferences, just look at the apps that people use, people will always willingly trade their intimate details for ease and flexibility in technology. And so the best thing we can do is, instead of whining about how people should care about their privacy more, because they won't listen, is eliminate the trade-off as much as possible. There's certain iron laws that may be irreducible, but if we can stop having this trade-off and people can have ease and flexibility with the things they want to do with their computers while still maintaining privacy, that's by far the best. Also, generally, I've always been uneasy with a certain aspect of all cryptocurrencies, which is there's these two distinct innovations. There's these decentralized blockchains, which allow peer-to-peer money and transactions and interactions. And then there's this monetary policy that comes from the Bitcoin community. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a fixed supply monetary unit inherently. I'm not against like a gold type standard, but I think it's one particular economic view, and it's a very tightly held and narrow economic view of what money should be. And it has limitations. And I just don't like limitations. I like Austrian economics, but I'm not a Rothbardian or a Misesian, if you guys know what that is. I'm a Hayekian who wants to see competition amongst monies. You know, there shouldn't just be one coin to rule them all. There shouldn't be one monetary policy to run them all. We should look to the market for competition there. And that means I want, like in a Hayekian sense, bottom-up flexibility for money. If somebody thinks they have a better idea of how to create a transferable unit, they should be able to enact that using a privacy-protecting infrastructure that is basically purpose agnostic, that is just a platform for whatever money you want to create, and should also be capable of providing privacy to you. So this synergy of something that's flexible like Ethereum, but private like Zcash is exactly what I want. I wrote a post that got published on the Foundation blog a couple days ago, or maybe yesterday. And that's where I sort of outlined my full views. So I won't go through the whole thing, but I just want to say that there's like two big use cases that most interest me. First is stablecoins. And the reason for that is, again, flexible monetary policies are interesting. We should experiment with them. But the main reason is to the extent that Zcash or cryptocurrencies can have a human rights impact, it's this ability for people to raise money, even if they're being censored by the mainstream financial system. So you look at pro-democracy protesters in Belarus, anti-police violence protesters in Nigeria. They've had success raising money using Bitcoin after being cut off from the correspondent banking system systematically by corrupt persons in their countries. And that's fantastic. That is the best news that's come out of the Bitcoin or crypto community over the last few years, far apart from anything discussed in Miami last weekend. Now, the problem is these people are being forced to use a very volatile asset in order to do that kind of human rights essential work. And that might be fine, but it shouldn't be an iron trade-off. They shouldn't have to use a particular, maybe fixed supply monetary unit in order to do that kind of censorship-resistant fundraising. So we should have stablecoins that are fully private and that are flexible. And then the other thing is I think there's a larger range of use cases, which again, I won't go into depth, which can evolve towards better cybersecurity, better digital identity tools that may involve tokenized credentials, verifiable credentials, with some level of privacy, but some level of revelation. To look into this, I think you should go watch Balaji Srinivasan's talk about the pseudonymous economy, about how we may want to build economies where you reveal selective aspects of yourselves when you interact with other people online or in communities. You should be able to share some aspects of your reputation without sharing your full name in real life. To do that, we're going to need decentralized infrastructure for things like credentials. And that's a huge project that's much larger than just user-defined assets. But that is, I think, ultimately where I really want to see the direction of the tech go.
It's interesting you talk there about allowing people the freedom to do their own thing. I think that permissionlessness, is a core concept for me when it comes to something like Zcash. Making sure that people can do what they want without having to go anywhere and ask for permission or to have anybody else restrict what they can do. JR, as you said, you ran the first ICO, and you did so in order to fund creation of a protocol for transferring assets on top of Bitcoin. And that protocol went on to be used by Tether to transfer billions of dollars worth of value around. Now, one of the concerns that has been raised regarding implementing UDAs on the Zcash network is the risk that no value will accrue to the underlying network, and that the value of the user-defined assets, the tokens or whatever gets created on top of the Zcash network, will come to dwarf that of the native token, i.e. ZEC. And Mastercoin has been cited as an example of how this can happen, because while the Mastercoin, or later the Omni protocol, was widely successful, it ultimately the master coins themselves never really accrued any value. Now, Ethereum would appear to be the counterexample to this, where it's been also wildly successful, and it would appear that the market has recognized how valuable Ethereum is for that purpose. But so, do you think there's a valid concern here that we have this top-heavy effect, where the assets that are placed onto or created on a network can end up effectively squeezing out the native token?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you set up the economics. And the nice thing about cryptocurrencies is you get kind of a blank slate, and you get to set up the economics however you want. In the case of Mastercoin, which later became Omni, the value of the new token that was released on top of Bitcoin, it went up like 100-fold. And then as Ethereum came out and started taking up a lot of the oxygen in the user assets space, the price of Mastercoin dropped about 100-fold. I mean, so, that took, many months and maybe a couple of years. But it was really more that Omni ended up being less flexible than Ethereum, and people liked that flexibility. Now, the advantage was with Omni that the less flexibility also meant that it never got hacked. You never saw a line of code in somebody's Solidity contract ending with millions of dollars getting lost. So there is some advantage to having a very prescriptive way of releasing user assets, but the market spoke and they chose Ethereum for most user asset stuff. Now, I think the risk to a protocol of releasing assets is not as much economic, because generally they charge a tax to anything that's released on top of them. And if something is wildly successful at a higher layer, it tends to benefit the lower layer economically. I think the bigger risk is more of a network congestion risk. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, our CTO sent me a chart, and he said, look, Omni transactions, which were almost all Tether transactions, he said, they're almost half of every Bitcoin transaction is an Omni transaction. And that's a big chunk of transactions, and it was driving up the transaction fees for everyone. And we saw this happen with Ethereum. With somebody releases CryptoKitties, and all of a sudden the network slows to a halt because there's so much volume going through. So you could definitely make the argument that CryptoKitties benefited Ethereum economically, but everybody that wanted to send money at a particular time of network congestion had to take into account the fact that tons of other people were using it. So the summary is, it'll probably benefit it economically. It'll probably hurt it from a transaction volume standpoint if it's successful, and you become a victim of your own success.
I know that obviously ECC have decided just a couple of years ago, in fact, that they were going to focus on scaling, and hopefully the solutions that they are bringing to the Zcash protocol, both in the form of Halo, which is due in the next network upgrade, and going forward, will hopefully remove that risk, or at least ameliorate that risk for Zcash. Moving on to Ian, there's obviously different ideas floating around, and different names and different ways of implementing this sort of technology on a platform like Zcash. Based on your exposure to the cutting edge of technology in this space, what are the most valid options for the foreseeable future of implementing UDAs or ZK assets, or whatever we want to call them, from a technical and a cryptographic perspective?
That's a good question. So from a cryptographic perspective, well, there are, I guess, options. There's one really clear choice that we've had prototype code for, both for doing in Sapling and now for doing in Orchard, which is the system that uses Halo. And it's actually just entirely, it's a sort of, from a cryptographic standpoint, what we call trivial in terms of a change. Basically, you can think of it as a normal Zcash transaction is the encryption of the owner of the money, the amount, and some metadata. If I was giving a lecture, I'd point out that it's actually a commitment, not encryption, but you can think of it just to encrypt these things. All we have to do a custom asset is add to that an extra piece of data, which is what type of money is it? Is it a shielded tether? Is it some ERC20, et cetera? And then make a very small change to the zero knowledge proof, the rules that allow you to do transactions, to make sure you can't mix and match, say, Tether with ZAC. And we know how to do this. Strad and Dara Hopwood worked out how to do it efficiently in Orchard. And it's not hard. In fact, other cryptocurrencies already are running with this prototype. There is a version of this called MASP, the multi-asset shielded pool, which is live on, I believe, still just a test net for Tezos. But from that point of view, it actually is quite straightforward. The more interesting questions, of which I am not as much of an expert on, what kind of economic things we can build atop these things once we have them, right? Can we do cross-chain things to say automated market makers on Ethereum or natively on Zcash and such in like a version 2 or 3 or 4. But for the basic version to iterate and ship, we already know how to do it. We already have prototype code. And thanks to Halo, we don't even have to do another trusted setup ceremony. So there's really not a blocker.
Yeah, I know that obviously ECC, having done a lot of the technical work here, they've recently engaged with George Mason University to do some of the econo research around the economics of creating this sort of functionality and how it will impact Zcash. I guess one of the Ian, just to go back to you, what are the technical implications of allowing people to have or to create assets that can be both transparent and shielded versus shielded only? Is there a huge advantage to doing it in a shielded only manner?
Yeah, I think there's an advantage technically if you don't have to maintain 2 different code bases and pass through the code, which is a security and just operational pain. There's a usability point if you just get this one thing. And there's a major point of if we provide shielded assets, ZK assets is what I like to call them, we will have an incentive for exchanges to adopt and support actually making private transactions, whereas currently they don't. Not so much actually, it turns out, because of compliance reasons, but because exchanges are busy and there's no way for some developer to justify to their manager that, hey, I should put in the 40 to 120 hours that it would take to roll out shielded on a small exchange when there's no customer demand. But if we have shielded only assets, we get customer demand. So I think that's a serious advantage.
Cool. Matt, during the dev fund discussions, I guess what, a year and a half ago now or so, you expressed an interest in doing work to bring UDAs to Zcash as part of a major grant. Are you still planning to do that? And what do you perceive to be the biggest obstacles from a practical perspective?
Yeah. So I'm obviously still really excited about Zcash, which is why I'm here. But it's kind of a bit of a complicated calculus as far as both on the business side, but also, like, I think I approach all of these problems from as pragmatic a startup approach as I can. So I think, is there product market fit? Yes, no. And that's kind of always the first question. And so so I guess the way that I'm looking at this, I sort of assume that the ECC and that everyone on this call has kind of already handled the cryptography. And I'm asking myself, like, what users want this? And obviously all of us on this call are going to say, well, we want people who are, battling oppressive regimes to be able to fundraise. And actually, like, that's why those are the reasons I got into the space. But the majority of people in our space right now are, oh gosh, let's not curse, slinging altcoins, and they are, sort of like trading. And one of the things that I noticed from sort of like the Mastercoin and Omni to Ethereum transition is, once you have an asset, what do you do with it, right? Because if you look at the Schelling point, there are only so many assets that are interesting in our space right now to like a regular user. There's Bitcoin, which is, here's where our Austrians can go. There's a very particular premise behind the asset, and they've mostly given up on any sort of technical dominance. There's a whole bunch of other coins which are largely competing on tech, which is interesting. There's people who have just given up and said, okay, we're the next GameStop, AMC, Shiba, whatever. There are stable coins. And then you have to ask yourself, like, what else is there? So one of the things that I see when I look at, I'm going to call them ZRC20s. Now, when I look at ZK assets, is I'm not actually sure that there's a strong demand to mint new assets. I am sure there's a strong demand to move stable coins and existing popular assets primarily on Ethereum. And so that's really what I look at is like, you know, I don't know that Zcash needs to take the reputational hit of making it easy to launch private dog money, but I do think that that it would be really cool to be able to move around cash. I am concerned though about the economic ramifications, and the reason is that you know, we work across a few different chains and communities, and I like to sort of like play cross-chain sociologist. And one of the things that I see in the Zcash community is that the ideology is so strong, which is very attractive, that we sometimes skip, you know, some things that investors in an asset might want to see. Even using the term investor, I think, is often a faux pas. And so for me, when I look at the economics, I'm like, okay, if you're going to be running, say, a centralized stablecoin in a shielded pool on Zcash, I'd like you to pay seigniorage. So that doesn't mean per transaction. There are tons of privacy issues with that, but I think that it's really hard to justify using shielded pool. It's hard for the chain without knowing that it's getting its VIG, it's getting its piece, and that value is accruing to Zeke. And then it's difficult. Yeah, it's just sort of difficult for the rest of us, I think, who are involved. I won't out this particular community member, but at a conference, I had someone walk up to me and say, well, you know, if I can just have perfectly private USD on Zcash, I should just sell all my Zeke and move to that. And maybe, but let's like make sure that you're paying a tax and improving network security when that happens. I don't think that that needs to stop the experiment from moving forward. I think that we need to find product market fit, but I do want to make sure people pay.
What about the fact, sorry, just let me quickly ask, what about the fact that there, first of all, thanks to JR, there were dollars on the Bitcoin network for a long time. What about the fact that there are stable coins on the Ethereum network for a long time? Do you think that you know, is an argument against the idea that just the availability of more stable assets means that people are going to dump their Zeke?
So the narrative I have for Omni versus Ethereum and why Ethereum wins is that on Ethereum, we can come up with games for people to play with their money. Like if you look at DeFi right now, there are a couple narratives. So one is the, you know, Bitcoin is replacing central banks and now DeFi is helping replace retail banking. It's like this very elegant narrative. Another is that this is a decentralized casino and that you can lever up and lever down and trade assets and make just ridiculous amounts of money and lose it very quickly. And no one even needed to design the incentives. Humans came with the incentives and we just gave them the tools to actually run the casino. So, you know, there's this sort of beautiful cathedral and then there's maybe a little bit closer to reality. And on Zcash, I don't think that there's an appetite to build a decentralized casino. I haven't heard lately about talks of full programmability on chain. I know that it's possible with Halo and moving toward that, but there's an entire ecosystem that Ethereum has built that supports that sort of behavior that Zcash doesn't have yet. And so for me, I don't want to get fancy. I just think when people come over, they might not have anything to do other than move their money around. And that's probably enough, but let's make sure that that they are charged.
Yeah.
So I really agree with Matt's point that the major market so far is just going to be moving around existing assets privately. But I'm actually quite skeptical, maybe you could explain, that this argument about economics, I don't quite get because Zcash doesn't exist in a vacuum. In fact, we are rapidly, and I do mean rapidly, on the order of a year to 18 months, running out of time where we are the only people with a serious privacy game in town. And so there may be a couple of whales who are like, well, if there was private tether, I just drop all my SEC. The thing is, one, as Peter said, I think private tether and private, I can't name the economists he described because I don't remember them. Private like Bitcoin like money are two different things and they don't compete. But two, there's going to be private tether on some other chain, whether it's Ironfish, which is a Zcash fork, something like MobileCoin if it gets up, or just Aztec on Ethereum. And so I don't think we get to play the game of just because we don't put up ZK assets on chain that we don't have to compete with ZK stablecoins. We will. They just won't be on Zcash and won't even be paying Zcash transaction fees. And so we don't get to wait.
Yeah, actually, if this doesn't sound like urgency for me, then I'm misspeaking. So I do think that this is an urgent market relevance concern.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to see shielded assets, which is for me why, on the one hand, I'm happy to hear that there's GMU involved with economics, but on the other hand, we'll see. It's probably going to be a little bit more complicated than we need and take maybe 12 months longer.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So I lean heavily toward, this is why I lean towards seigniorage, because it's uniform and it's simple. If you mint an asset on Zcash, just pay 1% of that asset. And then after that, all fees work the same as with SEC transactions.
Yeah. What do you take of the idea of sort of ship whatever for version 1? We have the crypto tech, we ship some fee mechanism or no fee mechanism, and then iterate.
So this is a bit of a thing that I'm dealing with right now with TBTC, where we're working on V2, and it's very much okay, we've done like the very secure thing. Now let's ship the very scalable thing and try to go mass market. And I suggested, well, what if we made a couple trade-offs? And what if we kind of like lowered the bar a little bit for ourselves and then we iterated toward better? And the community backlash, I haven't even announced it widely because early community members just sort of like, we're not a fan. So I think if the community will allow you to do that, it's fantastic. There's no reason to allow this economic question to stop development or to hold it off. There just needs to be a plan where if you're taking on like economic or organizational debt, you're going to pay it next network upgrade. But yeah, the question is just whether or not the community is okay with kind of relaxing some things.
I think that when you create something like Zcash and you're then responsible or charged in some way with helping maintain it or steward it, there is this instinct to protect it. There's this instinct to kind of protect it from the risks and try and ensure that it doesn't end up getting squashed. But I think there's also a risk that in trying to protect it, you end up constraining it. And I'm personally a huge fan of creating functionality and then allowing people to use it in creative ways, without necessarily thinking, oh, this is the use case for this technology. Like JR, when you created Mastercoin, did you expect that it would end up being used to transfer billions of dollars around, or what was the use case that you kind of envisaged when you came up with the protocol?
I was really excited about algorithmically stabilized stablecoins. And I was really excited about trading derivatives. So kind of the stuff that you see, some of the stuff you see happening on DeFi, on Ethereum right now. My thesis was there's trillions of dollars changing hands in the Forex markets and in the options markets. And if even a tiny, tiny fraction of that came to a decentralized protocol, it would balloon absurdly. And so that was what I was excited about. And for Zcash, I think there is an immense opportunity for a private US dollar. And this has been alluded to, but I don't think, like, I don't hear the excitement that I would expect to hear about how huge that could potentially be to have a private US dollar. Now, I don't want to say there's no downside to that. Like in addition to enabling many people that are oppressed, and freeing them to a degree, you're also freeing up a huge number of criminal enterprises who would love to have a very private US dollar that they could transfer from one place to another. And so, you should expect, you're going to have some conversations. Someone's going to get called before Congress. Somebody's going to have the FBI knock on their door. I mean, these are just things that happen. And, but the opportunity, the economic opportunity there is huge. And you have to ask yourself, well, okay, maybe the world might even be worse off if we build this, but somebody's going to build it, and do you want it to be some other project that gets massive because you didn't? I know for me, the calculus is if it's going to be built anyway, I kind of want to be the person to build it.
It's like an Ian Malcolm moment in Jurassic Park where you're like, you were so concerned with whether you could, you never asked if you should. But I think you're right. It's like someone will build this. And the thing we're going to want from a public policy standpoint, so putting my lawyer hat on, is for responsible persons to build this for the right reasons, right? And to do whatever they can to put reasonable guardrails in place that don't extend, however, to like some sort of master key for the whole system. Because if you put that master key in, you're just going to hurt innocent people, and someone else will build something without a master key. Sorry to keep using master, John, but I think, as far as, getting hauled in front of Congress or whatever, this is exactly what we are. This is our comparative advantage in the Zcash community. I think, I don't mean to be like on my high horse, but I think generally our intentions are very pure from an ideological standpoint. We want to see private peer-to-peer electronic cash. And the best way to do that right now, given macroeconomic situation, would be to have peer-to-peer private dollars, because that's widely around the world what is considered good money and people are comfortable with. And so if we enable that, I think you're absolutely right. We've done probably the single most important thing we can do to improve human conduct, if you believe that, before banks basically made every transaction visible, we didn't have a lawless society. Back when every transaction was done with cash in person, we didn't have a lawless society, and that was the free society that we want. So we can rebuild that now digitally, and that's why I'm passionate about this stuff.
The other interesting point is we will have a competitive market for different stable coins. You have, Z-wrapped Tether, ZK wrapped USDC, USD, whatever Gemini's coin's called. And these guys have very different approaches to blacklisting and money laundering prevention. Mm-hmm. And so, in some ways it allows us to a little bit and say, look, that can sort itself out, right? If you want to go ban, USD Tether in your country, well, we don't think that's a good idea, but we're not going to stop it. You can go, whatever, figure it out.
And this goes to Matt's point as well. And I think I agree with Matt's approach that it's easiest to get computationally derived assets from other chains onto Zcash rather than building them from scratch on Zcash. We're going to find out from a regulatory standpoint what the response to really private dollars is that move over the internet. It might be that these centrally backed tokens like a USDC or a Gemini dollar, they're not going to feel comfortable porting those things to our chain. And they're going to put kill switches in and things like that because maybe their regulators will blink. I'm not sure. The New York Department of Financial Services actually shown an interest in privacy preserving payments, which is great. But that's certainly not going to be the case from every regulator in every country. And so, the idea of DAI or RAI ending up on Zcash, with Zcash's privacy guarantees is really exciting to me, because that's going to be a different calculus from a regulatory standpoint.
And I guess I just want to bring back to this point of this stuff is coming on some other chain anyway. We don't get the luxury of waiting 12 to 18 months for some economists at wherever to figure out a model to do this. And we will find out what this world looks like. We will either be finding out from the sidelines or with the transactions on our chain, paying fees and Zach, and where we can shape it and they can fund further development and such.
I don't want to say it's already too late, but it's pretty late stage, I think.
Yeah, we are behind the curve on this.
Mm.
Who's
there's
leading?
A question.
Sorry, Matt, who do you think's leading?
So there's the meta question, like what do I think is going to get adoption first, but then like which teams have the highest momentum. And actually this came up a couple ZCon last time we were all in person, which is like people were talking about Matter Labs. I was like, why do people care about Matter Labs at ZCon? And now I'm like, now I understand why people care about Matter Labs, just because the momentum is so high. But I would expect, it just seems like they have higher momentum than Aztec as well on the Ethereum side. All of the Tezos stuff, all of these other chains, I personally don't care. And the reason is that they don't have a narrative or credibility in the space. Bitcoin has credibility, Ethereum has credibility, and actually Zcash has credibility that is very rare. And so for me, getting good shielded assets on Zcash means the narrative can go from private money, which people are like, that could be anywhere, to privacy for all of our money, like a privacy layer for the whole space. And I think that that's, everyone can get behind that.
There's a question, which I think is from Nathan from ECC. If there's demand for moving existing assets across chains, which is effectively what we're talking about when we're talking about digital dollars and whatnot, what will this look like when we see massive migrations to or from different chains as product market fit keeps evolving? And he cites the Tether migration from the Omni protocol and Bitcoin to Ethereum as an example of that. If we're talking about an economic model where these asset transactions require fees be paid in the underlying asset, in our case in Zeke, what does that mean if this sort of functionality becomes commoditized and you just have pure competition between different chains? Like, let's say somebody just clones the Zcash repo and creates a chain that's dedicated to allowing people to create and transfer other assets. That's for anyone to pick up.
So I think that's a metagame question of what if we succeeded and then it went wrong. And in fact, we've seen this. Okay, I'll just actually, particularly from senior people at ECC, we've seen this sort of, what if this thing that looks good for Zcash actually is bad, take for quite a while, and it's possible, right? But at least we'd have these things on here to start with and could, compete on, say, we have the better team to maintain rather than the fork, because technical updates are hard. We have the better scaling tech rather than the fork, again, because technical updates are hard. The number of teams that actually execute on complicated ZK cryptography is approximately 3, right? And so you would be in a competitive market with a market share that would be yours to lose, but you'd have it and you'd have the advantage. Whereas right now we run the very serious risk of being on the sidelines. And by the way, if you lose, if it turns out that everyone moves to some other thing and you're back to just being ZEC, well, you're back where you started, but having gotten more interested community members involved and more exchanges listing shielded assets, and therefore shielded ZEC in the same way if we're clever about how we roll it out. And so we've grown the thing and then it's contracted a little bit, but we'll still be better off for it.
I mean, I think you just have to look at Uniswap and SushiSwap to see your answer there. Like, of course, this stuff's going to get copied. And interestingly, speaking with the folks over there at Uniswap, like, they admire the work that SushiSwap's spending on their mobile app, and yet they're terrified about all the underlying stuff in Sushi that is not being updated like it's being updated on Uni. And so you actually get a pretty healthy competitive environment. There's a lot of stealing, but this is not the copyright world. This is not the trademark world. This is open source development, man, and it's rough and tumble, and you got to be fast.
Rising tides raise all ships.
Yeah.
There's also, like, fortune favors the bold. I think part of the conservative take in Zcash land is freedom money. We're helping people and oppressed regimes, that idea. And so it's not like, oh, wow, I messed up and this speculator lost $1 million that was ill-gained in the first place. It's not the same. You're talking about trying to help people who are struggling more. And I think that that's something that the community's got to decide is, like, do you want to move a little faster and stay relevant, and maybe make an economic mistake that you'll have to rectify later. But that also means that your mistake could end up being someone's freedom. And I think that's really hard to stomach, coming from, for example, when you're screwing around on Ethereum and you're like, well, I didn't do anything. I just shipped some code and they put their life savings into it.
Yeah, the good news, that is really a worry. The good news is, at least until we get into really complicated fee mechanisms that are not what you're proposing with senior stuff, the privacy risks of doing this are, I'm going to regret phrasing this way, but approximately 0. Yeah. We have a very good.
You guys have the best team and community for this too. Like you were the best possible you're in the best possible place to ship this if you can ship it.
And this has always been the trade-off with Zcash. Like, we don't have a full audit of the number of coins on the blockchain at any time because we can't, because they're private. We care about privacy more than we care about the possibility of inflation, which is, always there with every chain, maybe a little worse in zero knowledge chains, but we care about privacy.
Right. And we've got to embrace that. But this is, what do you need privacy? Why? Well, freedom fighters and dissidents and nothing. Also, like, if you're doing DeFi, you don't want people tracking all your transactions and figuring out your positions because, that'll be bad.
If we were to move to a model where the Zcash became a platform for issuing and transacting other assets, and we achieved these huge scalability enhancements that ECC is working towards, do you think there's a risk that the underlying asset Zeke then just becomes purely commoditized, with no capacity constraints to require that people pay higher fees to get their transactions through? Do you think that you end up with a platform that works very, very well for other people, but ultimately doesn't work necessarily for people who hold Zcash? JR, I think you got your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that question because there's a little bit of economic magic involved in trade-off discussions like that. What it makes me think of is companies in Silicon Valley who think, well, we're gonna get the users now and worry about the revenue later. That's a really good way to think about it, because that sometimes works really well. So the fact that you've lowered fees enough to allow a huge number of transactions doesn't necessarily hurt you if everybody moves to your platform and you're making 100 times more money on 100,000 times as many transactions. That can still be a big win. So I don't think I would be afraid of let's what if we make it too easy to transact here? That's not a problem that I would worry about. I would worry about adoption. And I want to speak to something that somebody said earlier about, projects stealing from each other. This happens all the time. A project copied me at one point. That same project copied Ethereum, and this, what that leaves you with is your only moat. If you don't have copyright protection, your only moat is user adoption and network effects. So then, and we see projects that have huge user adoption. I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to step on anybody's sacred cows, but sometimes those projects don't do a lot of innovating and they still keep a huge market value. And you might think that doesn't make any sense, but sometimes it just comes down to stupid stuff like name recognition. And this other project over here is doing this huge innovation, and for whatever reason, they don't have the name recognition. And guess what? The bigger project can just steal your stuff, and it's like you never even existed. So that's the lesson for me, is you want to be the big project with lots of name recognition, and yeah, you want to be easy to use, and you want lots of people using you, and the money will come if you get that.
And I want to just echo on that point. If you're worried that ZK assets in general are going to outclass ZK sound money, and I think, in fact, these are two different things and they don't really compete. But if you're worried about that, that's going to happen on some other chain anyway. And those chains are coming, right? So this is it's a false trade-off. We don't get to choose whether there are ZK assets or just ZAC. We only get to choose whether there are ZK assets on Zcash or not. And if you're worried that the existence of them is going to screw over ZAC, then that will come to pass whether we put them on our chain or not. And we got like 12 months, maybe.
Well, right now, I'm afraid we've only got 1 minute left, so I'm going to draw to a close there. There are a bunch of questions on the Discord, so including one from Matt about what you mean by seigniorage. So I'd encourage I'd encourage all the panelists to hop on Discord and take a look at the discussion and the questions there, and we can continue the discussion there. But for now, I'd like to say thank you to everyone, Peter, Ian, Matt, and JR especially. Thank you very much for joining us. Next up for ZCon will be a conversation with ZOMG starting in about 10 minutes. So please join us for that. But for now, hopefully next time we speak to you on this topic, we'll have more concrete plans for UDAs or ZK assets or ZRC20s or whatever we end up calling them on the Zcash network. But for now, goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.